Alright. Um, why were the demographers so wrong about the depths of the fertility fall? Because hundreds of millions of people were acting in privacy of their bedrooms for their own private reasons, probably oblivious of the demographers' predictions, of explanations of replacement rates, of survival of the species, or anything else related to cosmic demography. Oof. Yeah, he starts putting in like religious, spiritual stuff. It's really strange. The West Germans today are on a course that yields fewer than 1.3 children per woman over the course of their lifetime. Recent demographic projections show that if that rate continues, it would reduce the West German population from 60 million today to 50 million by the year 2000 and down to 16 million by the end of the next century. The German demographer visited Washington likes to talk about the pandas in the National Zoo. They have a great difficulty reproducing, and as a species, may be on the road to extinction. He says it makes him think about what the German situation will be like in the century to come. French Prime Minister Jacques Chirac says Europe is vanishing, and our countries will be empty. To be sure, the German demographer and M. Charisse exaggerate, but that's the image the trends yield. The prognosis, as we shall see, is better for the US, but the direction of the trend line is the same. Back in 1972, the distinguished American demographer Charles Westoff was staff director for the Commission of Population Growth and the American Future, chaired by John D. Rockefeller III. The spirit of that report says Westoff was one of belief that fertility rates had come down from the heights of the baby boom years. It extolled the idea of further decline toward a two-child average. Um, Despite the speculation in this book, I do think it has a real-world effect in terms of what the top people who could afford this book in power were fear-mongering with, because I do believe that the information in here it actually was talked about by Trump, just so you know. And you know how much of a fascist that dude is. The prognosis, as we shall see, is better for the U.S. Oh shit! Today, reviewing a variety of trends in motion in the U.S., some of which he says have not run their course, Westoff writes this, quote, "When we consider these trends and observe that fertility in the United States has been declining for 2 centuries, and when we see similar and even more extreme declines in other Western countries in recent years, the conclusion that fertility appears destined to remain low seems inescapable. The greater uncertainty appears to be how low it will fall. The large problems on the demographic horizon in Western countries will be those of aging, with population decline, and with questions of immigration." End quote. As I sense it, the way that numbers work out, we in the West have about one generation to first understand and then reverse this fertility freefall we have experienced. Otherwise, we will pay for it. In 1968, Paul Ehrlich, a biologist from Stanford University, turned his attention from fruit flies to human beings and wrote a small book called The Population Bomb. It sold millions of copies and seems to crystallize the thinking of an entire generation of young people who came to believe that we are crowding ourselves off the planet. It obviously can't be verified quantitatively, but it's likely that this view became more and more widely held. It played at least some role in the subsequent sharp fall in fertility. Women said they felt guilty in bringing yet another hungry, into a crowded, polluted world which was running out of resources. Women who thought about having a third child have told me that their peers let them know that it would somehow be unfair to have a large family. In my judgment, at that time, Ulrich's idea was wrong-headed. Surely so for the peoples of the free industrial nations. I believed then that it was based on both faulty examination of the data and faulty logic. I believe now that subsequent developments have justified my earlier view. The population bomb did demonstrate one truth, however, that a little book in this arcane field of demography can have a mighty impact on the nature of the world. It is my hope that the birth Earth will have a similar fate as it makes the opposite case. Alright, Chapter 2, Freefall. The principal actors and perhaps victims in this volume are the people who live in the community of nations that are best described by those words: modern, industrial, free. Although the most attention here is paid to the United States, such a grouping of countries would also include Canada. It would include all the states of Western Europe. It would include Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, as well as Israel, Iceland, 22 nations in all. I refer to them here variously as, quote, the community, and quote, the alliance, and quote, the Western nations. Like, who the hell doesn't call them that? The Pacific members of this group are obviously not, quote, Western in a geographic sense, but they tend to qualify on the grounds of modernity, economic status, and culture. There's a paradox at work in the central idea of this book. I am saying to those modern nations, watch out! I am saying that in the modern world of the falling birth rates we are facing are new and potentially hazardous. Yet in another sense, it is by no means a new story that fertility rates have fallen in these nations. Indeed, family size has been going down in a bumpy fashion in the industrial nations almost since the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Consider the United States. We have good documentation dating back from around almost 200 years. The very founding of the nation involved a constitutional call for a census in 1790. Data from that count, as well as from other earlier sources, reveal that American females of that time typically bore about 7 children over the course of their fertility years. This figure represents the completed fertility of a cohort of women, and it relates to what we now call the total fertility rate, TFR. For many purposes, surely for the longer range trends often stressed in this book, the TFR probably is the single most meaningful birth indicator in the demographic trade. Accordingly, much will be heard of it in this volume, as is explained in some technical detail on page 26 and 27. In 1890, 100 years after the first census, the completed fertility rate was not 7, but down to about 4. And today, almost another century later, the U.S. is down to TFR of 1.8 below the replacement rate, a birth-dearth level. Even sharper fertility decreases and levels are observable in the other modern Western nations. The paradox here is this. It is precisely because in the industrial world, the trend of downward fertility is so old and so universal that, at its current levels, it is both, quote, new and potentially threatening. It is not that demographers haven't understood for a long time the relationship between a modern society and lower birth rates. As people move from rural to urban settings, from farms to factories, from country homesteads to city row houses, all facets of modernism, then fertility falls. As incomes go up, as women move into the workforce, as education increases, all facets of modernism, then fertility rates fall. As technology yields better contraceptive techniques, as standards change to permit legal abortion, once again, facets of modernism, then fertility falls. All those relationships seem to be at the work today, and, as we shall see, show little sign of imminent reversal. Indeed, the likelihood is that the trend to even lower fertility may not have run its course. So what is new And scary about this old trend, it is that in the last 2 decades, it has reached and then breached the magic demographic number of 2.1 per woman referred to earlier. As noted, that is the rate required over time and absent immigration, merely to keep a population at a stable level. Um, Again, as noted, many demographers assumed that there was something in the nature of the human species that would stop the decline of fertility when it more or less reached this 2.1 level, the replacement rate. As that happened, it was assumed that in a demographic sense, everyone would live happily ever after, with the population that would neither grow nor shrink much.